Welcome to 20 Minutes to Business Insights, a complimentary resource webinar series from AKA Coach and Company. I'm Annie Kirshenman, and I'll be your host for our topic today, Generation X, the neglected middle child. This was actually a requested topic, so thanks to Christine for recommending it. I certainly learned a lot in doing the research. And if you have a topic that you'd like us to explore on a future 20 minutes, please feel free to email me after the webinar today. So I'm going to go ahead now and turn off my video feed so that you can focus on our slides. So with me today is Ann Barton, and she's going to be monitoring our Q&A. Now, this is a short and to-the-point webinar, and we have a lot, as usual, packed into our 20 minutes. We do also hope to have time for a few questions. So if you have a question or comment, please feel free to type that into the chat box. We'll take what we can towards the end of the session. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Annie Kirshenman. I'm a board certified coach. My specialty designation is executive, corporate, business, and leadership. I'm also a business person, have been for more than 20 years. However, the world of business is not where I started. I come from a background in the arts, and creativity as well as innovation are a major part of my work today as a coach and facilitator. I'm also a former executive. I stepped down from my CEO role in 2005, and I just love sharing what I've learned, what works, what's interesting for me as well as others, ergo this webinar series. So if you're joining us live, thanks for being here, and if you're watching a recording, thanks for taking time out of your day to view it. So to our topic today, Generation X. Please bear in mind that I'm citing information here primarily from the literature about Gen X in North America. And this generation, like all generations, of course, is a worldwide one. So this from the Pew Research Group, this generation is estimated at approximately 65 million. That's significantly less than either the boomers or the millennials, which starts to get us into the Gen X in the middle theme. Pew describes this as the low-slung straight line bridge between two noisy behemoths. And I will say this is not the only place in the literature that describes the boomers and millennials as noisy behemoths. This could also be known as the generation with a gripe. Sandwiched between baby boomers and the millennials, even their name is a retread. First coined by World War II photographer Robert Capa in a photo essay about the young adults of the 1950s. But it didn't stick at that time. Generation X was revived some 30 years later by Canadian author Douglas Coupland, whose coming-of-age novel, Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture, was set in Southern California. A little bit more about that resource in a moment. According to Pew, Gen X also got the short end of basic generational arithmetic. This was partly due to their parents' relatively low fertility rates, and in part because they've been deemed to span just 16 years, while most generations are credited with lasting around 20 years. Why? No one really seems to know. Generational boundaries are fuzzy and arbitrary at best, as well as culture-driven. And once fixed by those mysterious forces of the zeitgeist, they do tend to firm up over time, which is what's happened with Generation X. So who are they? From the literature, some hallmarks. While the dates for this generation will vary depending upon the source in the literature, generally they were born between 1965 and the early 1980s. They're also known as the sandwich, latchkey, or boomerang generations. Gen Xers spent significant less time with their parents than previous generations of children. You may recall they were first recognized as latchkey kids because this generation found themselves home alone and taking care of themselves and their siblings while their parents were at work. Divorce was common among parents of Gen Xers, and they certainly were not coddled for every emotional need and want. Gen Xers learned early that their parents were human as well as fallible, and often found themselves treating their parents like older friends. Autonomy and self-reliance, rather than respect for authority, were natural byproducts of a Gen X childhood. Gen Xers learned independence very early in life, and they turned it into a valuable hallmark as they progressed in the working world. You may also recall that at one point in time, Gen Xers were considered slackers. However, I think as you'll see in the upcoming slides, they're anything but slackers. This tends to be a cynical, somewhat skeptical generation. They grew up and came of age during a time of emerging technology, as well as political and institutional incompetence. To name but a few: Watergate, 3 Mile Island, the Iranian hostage crisis, and the Clinton-Lewinsky debacles mark the emergence of this generation. Gen Xers saw mimeograph machines turn to high-speed copiers. Faxes go from 30 minutes a page to mere seconds, and heavy adding machines be replaced with handheld calculators. Whereas computers were the size of whole buildings for the traditional generation and whole rooms for the boomers, for Gen Xers, the computer became a desktop appliance. Baby boomers came to understand that the future was theirs for the taking. Not so with Generation X, who tends to feel that the future has been given to their parents and older siblings, and they find the future disappointing and somewhat unappealing. So just as one example, while baby boomers whined about the long lines for gas in the mid-1970s, Gen Xers watched from the back seat, wondering just what the future held for them. These are digital pioneers. They found that the technological, savvy that they had developed as the first generation to have grown up with computers and video games made them highly employable in what had seemed to be a saturated market. Okay, so a little bit about this stuck in the middle, neglected middle child thing. This graphic is from the Pew Research, and I recognize that it is hard to see on this slide. We'll be sending you a link post-webinar so that you can take a deeper dive into looking at this for yourself. And it does give a general impression of why Pew dubbed this the generation, the neglected middle child. So what you're seeing here are Gen X in the middle in the gold color, sandwiched between those boomers and the millennials on various indicators. So just a few of those to highlight the point. Compared with boomers and millennials, who both generations tend to think they are pretty special, Gen Xers tend towards the impression that their generation is not unique. In line with being pessimistic about the future, they also don't feel that retirement, or at least full retirement, will be possible for them. Gen Xers are frustrated, and they say that boomers should just step out. They feel that boomers have messed up the world and should get out of the way and let Gen X take over. This is actually from Gen Xers' comments at the Pew Research site, which I found worthy of mention, especially in light of some resources I'm going to be sharing with you shortly. And final example, unlike either the boomers or millennials, Gen X tends towards being conservative. Okay, as you can see from this resource, passed over and not so happy about it. Dr. Mia Mulrenian, apologies on that pronunciation if it's not correct, says that Generation X is fed up and frustrated. Corporate America has turned a deaf ear for too long, and baby boomers have retained their positions of power longer than anyone anticipated. And boomers are now focusing their attention on grooming the millennials rather than Generation X in order to leave a legacy before they retire. And here it is again, sandwiched between two behemoth generations. The members of Generation X are the outnumbered, seldom mentioned underdog generation. Many Gen Xers are tired of patiently waiting for their turn to lead, languishing in non-leadership roles, and they won't wait forever. She asks the question, can we stand a Gen Exodus? Again, we'll be sending you a link on how you can get your hands on these resources and just a couple of more to highlight for you. This is the one I mentioned earlier, Generation X by Douglas Copeland. It seems to be an important touchstone for Gen X and is frequently quoted in the literature on Gen X. The next one, X Saves the World. The manifesto for a generation that never had much use for manifestos by Gen Xer Jeff Gordinier. Again, apologies on the pronunciation there. This is a tribute to his generation, and he suggests that Gen X really has what it takes to rescue our culture from a state of collapse. Anna Sophia Martin offers another perspective in her article, The Undetected Influence of Generation X. She says, if they're moving mountains, they're not broadcasting it. At work, Xers are taking management roles and mentoring their younger coworkers. A whopping 55% of startup founders are part of Gen X. So thinking about that Gen Exodus question from the previous slide, employers take note. This is a highly entrepreneurial generation and they can manage just fine on their own if need be. Martin says, as the masters of self-deprecation, Gen Xers love to balk at attention and even hide from it. But they're quietly becoming residents of the C-suite, your friends, moneymakers, and spenders. Ignore them at your peril. So what do they bring to the workplace? A study published by EY, formerly Ernst & Young, includes these insights from more than 1,200 professionals across generations and industries about the strengths and weaknesses of workers from different generations. So this is based on perceptions of coworkers. I will say that I have seen these particular strengths echoed in the literature that I researched on Gen Y. So this generation, very effective managers. A huge percentage of the respondents in this study, 70%, said they believed Gen X are the most effective managers. Compared to boomers, only 25%, and Gen Y, only 5%. Members of Gen X scored highest when it comes to being revenue generators at 58% of respondents. Possessing traits of adaptability, 49% agree. Problem solvers, 57%. And collaborators, 53%. And as we've already seen, they are entrepreneurial and possess a high level of self-management. So what do employers want from Gen Xers? Now, this is from the same EY study, and it is a surprisingly short list, which again is echoed in the literature I reviewed. I really dug around for other things that employers find lacking, and I came up empty-handed. So this could point to the overall competence with which Gen Xers are viewed by employers. But a couple of things. Gen Xers are entrepreneurial, but they rank quite low on executive and leadership presence. In fact, they scored the lowest compared to other generations when it comes to displaying executive presence at only 28%. So while they're terrific managers, employers seem to find them lacking when it comes to leadership. This, of course, could be another reason that they're not advancing into more leadership or executive roles. And second point, while they are rainmakers, good revenue generators, as we saw, on the other end, employers don't find that they manage costs particularly effectively. So what do Gen Xers want in the workplace? Not surprisingly, they'd like a little recognition. As we've seen, Gen Xers have been self-managing from an early age, and they are problem solvers. So they want the ability to be able to be more involved in the decision-making process. To recruit, retain, and motivate Xers, appeal to a desire that they have for balance, very strong desire. Develop family-friendly programs that offer flexible schedules, telecommuting, and job sharing, for example. They want to be independent, so go ahead and encourage that. And they're able to manage multiple priorities. They want to do it, give them those jobs. Go ahead and remove the bureaucracy and the tenure-based rewards, but do not remove yourself. Xers crave feedback, especially from the boss. It's interesting to note that Gen Xer respondents in the survey ranked workplace flexibility as the most important perk, and they're also much more likely to walk away from their current job if that flexibility is not available. 66% of Gen X women and 55% of Gen X men want that flexibility. And of course, they want those management and leadership roles. So continuing on with some more tips for employers. Generally speaking, Gen X thrives on diversity, challenge, responsibility, honesty, and creative input. So let them know that they matter, that their work is important to you. Provide that all-important flexibility. Offer opportunities to be creative and solve problems. Give them the managerial roles and the responsibility. They want it, they're good at it. And also provide them with training and coaching to develop their executive presence and leadership presence. Similarly, provide them with training and tools to become more cost-effective, more cost-conscious. Give them the regular one-on-one time with the boss that they crave and mentor them, as well as provide meaningful feedback to them. So briefly, a little bit about the impact of this. I'm sure everybody listening to the webinar can start to imagine some of the potential impacts. Here are a couple. Again, generally speaking, we can say that unhappy employees in the workplace are never a good thing. And as you can see from this brief exploration, Gen Xers are not particularly happy campers at the moment. So there's some big opportunities here for companies and organizations to create or perhaps enhance a workplace culture that actively leverages Gen X strengths and proactively includes their perspectives. And by actively seeking and including their points of view, of course, there's going to be new strengths in organizations because their ideas, their thoughts are going to be on the table. Remember, Gen Xers are problem solvers. Great benefit there. Gen Xers are the parents of the next generation, which was recently dubbed Generation Z. And in a nutshell, they've been attempting to give them the security as well as the practical upbringing that they did not have. Now, Generation Z is another large generation, some 74 million at current estimates. And Gen X, of course, is having a strong impact on these youngsters who are just getting ready to enter the workplace at the upper end. They're about 19 to 20 years old. So think legacy in terms of the impact that Gen X is having. Okay, well, we are bumping up against our time here. Maybe we'll have a moment for a few questions. We'll see if we have any. First of all, what's next? You're going to be receiving a follow-up email with information on the resources I mentioned, as well as a link for the video recording if you'd like to view it again or share it with a friend or colleague, and how to register for the next free 20 minutes to in Business Insights, which we will hold on May 17th at 12 noon Central Time. And of course, we have to do a 20 minutes on Generation Z to round out our 20 minutes exploration of generations in the workplace. So we will be taking a look at Gen Z on May 17th. Okay, we are at time, and do we have any questions that I could briefly address?
Yeah, we actually do, Annie. So there's a question from Chris, and the question is, how do you continue to be motivated after so many years of putting up with, and as an example, being replaced by someone 25 years younger with no cause?
Oh gosh, Chris. First of all, I'm sorry. It's a tough nugget. I think that in the time that we have for me to make a few suggestions, I think you would find the resources I mentioned inspirational. And there's tips in there not only for employers, which hopefully more and more employers will begin to take a look at those tips, but also I think some inspirational things for members of Gen X. So that's my short answer to the question. And let me also say that you're not alone. I've heard that same comment from a lot of Gen Xers who are fed up with, again, that being passed over syndrome. So thank you for the question.
So we have a follow-up real briefly. Annie, Chris says, I started my own business. It's hard to keep motivated, so I'll check out the resources. Thank you.
Great, good. Yeah, well, and Chris, as a member of Gen X, you're probably in the right place with your own business because you are, by nature of your generation, more than likely highly entrepreneurial. So good place to be, I think, rather than employed, perhaps. Okay, well, we've gone a few minutes over, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. This has been 20 Minutes to Business Insights, a complimentary resource webinar series from AKA Coach and Company. Thank you again for joining us live or viewing the recording. I'm Annie Kirschenman, and this is my contact information if you'd like to be in touch. Thanks again, Christine, for the suggestion for this topic, and anyone who has a suggestion, please feel free to email me something you'd like to see us explore in a future 20 Minutes to Business Insights. And I hope to see you at the next webinar on May 17th when we'll be talking about Generation Z. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.